The early life and education of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, born Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, is one of the most influential figures in modern history. His philosophy of non-violence, ahimsa, and civil disobedience led India to independence and shaped social and political movements worldwide. However, before Gandhi became the globally recognized leader of India's independence movement, he was a young boy growing up in the small coastal town of Porbandar in the state of Gujarat, India. His early life was marked by the values of family, religion, and education, which would lay the foundation for his later development as a thinker, leader, and freedom fighter. Birth and family background. Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869 in Porbandar, a coastal town in present-day Gujarat. His father, Karamchand Gandhi, was the Diwan, chief minister of Porbandar, while his mother, Putlai, came from a deeply religious and devout family. Gandhi often attributed his strong sense of morality, ethics, and compassion to the influence of his mother. She was a deeply spiritual woman who followed Jainism, which places significant importance on non-violence, truth, and compassion towards all living beings. This would have a profound impact on Gandhi's own development. The Gandhi family was well respected in the local community, and their home was a place of warmth and hospitality. Gandhi's family belonged to the Vaishya merchant caste, and though his father was a well-known figure in the community, they were not among the richest or most influential families in the region. Nevertheless, the family's financial stability allowed Gandhi to receive a good education and provided him with a supportive environment during his formative years. Childhood in Porbandar. Gandhi's childhood was largely shaped by his experiences in Porbandar. He was a shy and introverted child, often feeling insecure about his physical appearance and social status. This sense of insecurity would remain with him throughout his life, but it also motivated him to focus on self-improvement and seek deeper understanding. Gandhi was deeply influenced by the teachings of his mother, who encouraged him to practice truthfulness, compassion, and humility. As a child, Gandhi was very much influenced by the cultural and religious practices of his family. He grew up in a home where Jain principles, including non-violence, vegetarianism, and tolerance, were practiced with dedication. Gandhi would later recount how his mother's deep religious devotion shaped his early understanding of life's meaning. From a very young age, he was taught the importance of non-violence and truth. These principles would go on to become the cornerstone of his future philosophy. One of the most significant early experiences in Gandhi's childhood came when he first encountered the concept of fear. At the age of 9, Gandhi was a witness to the death of his father, Karamchand, which had a lasting impact on him. Gandhi's father died on the same day that his wife, Putlai, was suffering from severe illness. Gandhi, being a young boy, did not understand the full significance of death, but was nonetheless profoundly affected by this experience. It was in this period of his life that Gandhi began to develop a sense of spirituality and sought solace in religious texts and teachings. Early education. Gandhi's formal education began in Porbandar, where he attended primary school. He was a bright student, but struggled with his shyness and tendency to be introverted. In school, Gandhi was known to be a diligent and respectful student, but he did not stand out as exceptionally brilliant. It is important to note that Gandhi was deeply influenced by his reading habits at an early age. His mother had instilled in him a love for reading religious texts, and Gandhi's intellectual curiosity led him to explore not only religious teachings but also literature and history. At the age of 11, Gandhi moved to Rajkot, a larger town, to continue his education. There, he attended a high school where he began to excel academically. Although his academic performance was solid, Gandhi still felt a sense of inadequacy compared to his peers. He felt insecure about his appearance, his social status, and his ability to compete with others. This insecurity led him to develop a deep sense of self-doubt, which he later used to fuel his personal journey toward self-improvement. It was during this time in Rajkot that Gandhi began to read more widely and develop his own philosophical ideas. He was deeply influenced by the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, a sacred Hindu text that focuses on the concepts of duty, dharma, and devotion. He also read the Bible and other religious texts, which contributed to his growing interest in religion and spirituality. Gandhi often wrote about his deep love for the Bhagavad Gita, considering it a guide for his life's purpose and actions. The Gita's central message of performing one's duty without attachment to the fruits of actions would later become a central element of his political philosophy. Education in England, the decision to study law. Despite his academic progress in Rajkot, Gandhi still faced a number of obstacles in his personal development. He was always looking for a greater sense of purpose and direction, and after much consideration, he made the decision to pursue a law degree in England. This decision, though difficult, marked a significant turning point in his life. In 1888, at the age of 18, Gandhi sailed to London to study law at University College London. The decision to go to England was not an easy one for Gandhi, as it meant leaving behind his family and home in India. His mother Putlaibai was reluctant to let him go, but Gandhi was determined to pursue his studies and expand his horizons. Before leaving, his mother made him swear that he would never touch alcohol or eat meat, and Gandhi promised her that he would adhere to these values throughout his life. Gandhi's time in London was transformative, as it exposed him to new ideas, cultures, and philosophies. In London, he was exposed to the broader world outside of his Indian upbringing. He encountered a diverse array of students and intellectuals, which broadened his understanding of the world. Gandhi became deeply interested in Western philosophy, particularly in the works of thinkers such as Leo Tolstoy, John Ruskin, and Henry David Thoreau, whose ideas about nonviolence and civil disobedience influenced his later work. Despite facing initial challenges in London, including cultural differences and the lack of social connections, Gandhi remained committed to his goal of becoming a barrister. He studied hard and eventually completed his law degree in 1891. However, Gandhi's experiences in London would not just be academic, they would be deeply philosophical and spiritual. His time in England marked the beginning of his internal transformation, where he began to question his own cultural identity and develop a deeper understanding of the connection between religion, politics, and society. Return to India, and early legal career. After completing his studies in London, Gandhi returned to India in 1891. Initially, he struggled to establish his career as a lawyer. His first attempt at practicing law in Bombay, now Mumbai, was not successful, as he lacked the necessary experience and confidence to succeed in the competitive legal field. Gandhi's early legal career was marked by failure, but these failures would play a significant role in shaping his future. In 1893, Gandhi received an offer to work as a legal advisor for a Muslim merchant community in the city of Durban, South Africa. At the time, South Africa was home to a large number of Indian immigrants, many of whom faced discrimination and hardship under the oppressive policies of the British colonial government. Gandhi's move to South Africa marked the beginning of his political activism and his engagement with social issues. Conclusion of early life and education. Gandhi's early life and education were pivotal in shaping his philosophical and political views. His childhood experiences in Porbandar, coupled with his academic studies in India and London, provided him with the intellectual tools and spiritual foundations that would guide him throughout his life. Gandhi's early experiences with religion, family, and education created the framework for his later work as a leader and freedom fighter. His quest for self-improvement, spiritual growth, and understanding of the world set the stage for his future work in South Africa, and his eventual leadership in India's independence movement. Gandhi's early years were marked by a deep sense of internal conflict, as he struggled with issues of identity, self-worth, and purpose. However, these challenges also served as a catalyst for his later transformation. By the time he returned to India in 1915, Gandhi had already begun to form his ideas about non-violence, truth, and justice principles that would guide him as he led the Indian independence movement. His early life was not without its struggles, but it was during these formative years that he laid the groundwork for his extraordinary life and legacy. Gandhi in South Africa, the birth of political and philosophical awakening. In 1893, at the age of 24, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi embarked on a journey that would transform his life and ultimately the world. This chapter of his life began when he accepted a job offer to work as a legal advisor for the Indian community in South Africa. Little did Gandhi know, this would be the start of a political and philosophical journey that would shape his future as one of the most significant figures in modern history. South Africa would be the crucible in which he would develop his beliefs on social justice, nonviolence, and civil disobedience, which would later fuel India's struggle for independence from British colonial rule. The context: South Africa in the late 19th century. During the late 19th century, South Africa was under British colonial rule, and the country's racial segregation policies were deeply entrenched. There were significant numbers of Indian immigrants in South Africa, most of whom had come to work as indentured laborers, traders, and merchants. However, the Indian community faced widespread discrimination and were subjected to severe racial laws that restricted their civil rights, including the infamous Pass laws, which required non-Europeans to carry identification documents at all times. Upon arriving in South Africa in 1893, Gandhi was appalled by the overt racism and prejudice against Indians as well as the widespread racial injustice faced by the black population. Though he was initially focused on his legal work, he was soon thrust into a series of events that would spark his sense of moral outrage and transform him into a leader of the Indian community in South Africa. The incident that sparked Gandhi's activism. One of the most pivotal events that marked the beginning of Gandhi's political activism occurred shortly after his arrival in South Africa. Gandhi was traveling from Durban to Pretoria by train when he was forcibly removed from a first-class compartment, despite holding a valid ticket. As an Indian, he was not allowed to travel in first class, and when he protested the discriminatory treatment, he was thrown off the train at the Pietermaritzburg station in the middle of the night. This incident, which Gandhi later described as a turning point in his life, deeply affected him. It was a moment of personal humiliation, but it also ignited a deep sense of injustice and the determination to fight back against the systemic racism he encountered. Gandhi realized that he could not ignore the oppression of his fellow countrymen and the unjust laws that degraded the dignity of the Indian community in South Africa. The beginnings of Gandhi's activism, the Natal Indian Congress. In response to the discrimination and the treatment faced by the Indian community, Gandhi soon began organizing protests and petitions. He joined the Natal Indian Congress (NIC), a political organization that had been formed to represent the interests of Indians in South Africa. Gandhi's involvement with the NIC marked the beginning of his public activism. He realized that the Indian community, despite being a minority in South Africa, needed to unite and fight for their rights. Through the NIC, Gandhi began to understand the broader issues of race relations, political inequality, and social injustice. He recognized that Indians in South Africa were not only marginalized but were also denied basic civil rights. Gandhi's activism grew, and he began to promote the idea of a peaceful struggle against the oppressive laws and policies. Gandhi's involvement with the NIC and his increasing awareness of the social injustices that the Indian community faced in South Africa led him to adopt a new approach to political activism, one that emphasized nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience. He soon coined the term satyagraha, a Sanskrit word meaning truth force or soul force, to describe this philosophy of nonviolent protest and resistance to oppression. The development of satyagraha and civil disobedience. The most significant development during Gandhi's time in South Africa was the creation and practice of satyagraha. Initially, Gandhi's primary focus was to secure equal rights for Indians in South Africa. But as he engaged more deeply with the injustices of the time, he began to formulate a broader philosophy that would define the rest of his life and political activism. Satyagraha was based on the principles of truth, nonviolence, and love. Gandhi believed that individuals could resist injustice without resorting to violence or hatred. He argued that true power comes from an individual's commitment to nonviolence and truth, and through this spiritual force, one could achieve social and political change. Satyagraha was not merely a passive form of resistance but an active, engaged method of protest. It involved the practice of civil disobedience, where individuals consciously broke unjust laws, suffered the consequences, and refused to cooperate with oppressive systems. Gandhi's idea of nonviolent resistance also emphasized self-discipline, the cultivation of inner peace, and the rejection of materialism. He believed that satyagraha required inner strength, moral courage, and a willingness to endure suffering for the greater cause of truth and justice. Gandhi's first large-scale application of satyagraha in South Africa came in 1906. He led a campaign of nonviolent resistance against the Azadic Registration Act, also known as the Pass Law, which required all Indian adults in South Africa to be registered and carry identification documents. This law was widely viewed as a symbol of racial oppression, and Gandhi's campaign against it was the first time he used nonviolent protest on a large scale. The first major satyagraha campaign, the 1906 Passive Resistance Movement. In response to the Azadi Registration Act, Gandhi called upon the Indian community in South Africa to engage in a mass campaign of non-violent resistance. He urged his followers to peacefully refuse to register for the pass despite the legal consequences. The movement was initially small, but it gained momentum as more and more Indians joined the protest. Gandhi's leadership and commitment to non-violence were tested during this campaign. Hundreds of Indians, including women and children, were arrested, beaten, and jailed for their refusal to comply with the registration law. Gandhi himself was arrested, but he remained steadfast in his commitment to non-violence and passive resistance. The movement drew widespread attention to the plight of the Indian community in South Africa and marked the first real application of satyagraha. While the movement did not immediately achieve its goals, it was successful in raising awareness about the issue of racial discrimination and the injustices faced by the Indian community. The campaign also helped to solidify Gandhi's status as a leader of the Indian community in South Africa. Gandhi's personal transformation in South Africa. During his time in South Africa, Gandhi underwent a profound personal transformation. The experiences of working closely with the oppressed Indian community and witnessing the systemic racism of the colonial government deepened his commitment to social justice. Gandhi also began to develop his personal philosophy of self-reliance and simplicity, which would later become key aspects of his leadership style. In addition, his time in South Africa helped him develop a clearer sense of his role as a political leader. Gandhi's commitment to truth and non-violence in the face of oppression made him a figure of moral authority, and his influence began to extend beyond the Indian community. His work in South Africa also helped him understand the interconnectedness of social and political struggles. Gandhi came to realize that the fight for Indian rights in South Africa was part of a broader global struggle for human dignity and equality. Legacy of Gandhi's time in South Africa. By the time Gandhi left South Africa in 1914, after a successful negotiation with the British government to grant Indian communities some rights, he had become a prominent figure in the global struggle for civil rights and social justice. His time in South Africa was crucial in shaping his political philosophy and leadership style, which would go on to influence the Indian independence movement. The experience in South Africa had a profound and lasting impact on Gandhi, not just as a leader of the Indian community, but as a champion of human rights and nonviolent resistance. Gandhi's work in South Africa laid the foundation for his later efforts in India, where he would go on to lead one of the most significant non-violent movements in history, one that would inspire freedom movements worldwide. Gandhi's return to India and early leadership in the independence movement. In 1915, after spending over 2 decades in South Africa, Gandhi returned to India as a recognized leader and advocate for social justice. His time in South Africa had not only transformed his personal philosophy but also molded him into a powerful voice for political and social change. Though Gandhi was already known among certain circles in India, his return marked the beginning of his active involvement in the Indian freedom struggle against British colonial rule. The period between 1915 and the early 1920s was pivotal for Gandhi as he solidified his role as the leader of the Indian independence movement and began implementing his ideas of non-violence, civil disobedience, and mass mobilization. Gandhi's return to India and early interactions. Upon his arrival in India in January 1915, Gandhi was warmly welcomed by his fellow countrymen. He had been gone for more than 2 decades, and in his absence, he had gained international recognition for his work in South Africa, particularly his philosophy of non-violent resistance. Gandhi had left India as a relatively unknown young lawyer but returned as a man who had already made an impact on global political thought. However, despite his reputation, Gandhi was initially hesitant about assuming a leadership role in India's ongoing struggle for independence. He spent some time traveling around the country to learn about the conditions of the people and the challenges they faced under British rule. His first destination was the state of Gujarat, his homeland, where he connected with local leaders and ordinary citizens to understand the socio-economic issues they were experiencing. During his travels, Gandhi was struck by the dire poverty and backwardness of rural India. The exploitation of peasants, the illiteracy, and the overall misery of the rural population deeply troubled him. He realized that India's freedom struggle was not just a political battle, but also a social and economic struggle. He recognized that for India to become truly free, it would require addressing issues of poverty, inequality, and social injustice, along with political independence from British colonial rule. Gandhi's early campaigns, Champaran and Kheda. Gandhi's first major political involvement in India came with his leadership of the Champaran and Kheda movements, two significant campaigns that set the stage for his broader work in the Indian independence struggle. These campaigns were centered around the problems faced by Indian farmers and peasants, who were being exploited by British policies and local landlords. Champaran Movement 1917. In 1917, Gandhi was invited by the peasants of Champaran, a region in Bihar, to investigate the oppressive conditions they were living under. The British colonial government had forced the farmers to grow indigo, a cash crop, under extremely exploitative terms. The farmers were paid low wages, and their land was taxed heavily by the British, causing widespread poverty and suffering. Gandhi's arrival in Champaran marked the beginning of his active political involvement in India. He conducted an inquiry into the situation, and when the British authorities tried to intimidate him and prevent him from organizing the peasants, Gandhi refused to comply, invoking his principle of non-cooperation. His involvement in Champaran was not limited to political agitation. He also organized the peasants to peacefully protest and resist the unjust policies. The success of the Champaran movement was a major milestone in Gandhi's journey. The British were forced to review the indigo cultivation system, and many of the peasants' demands were met. This victory proved that non-violent resistance, when organized effectively, could lead to tangible political change. The Champaran movement marked the beginning of Gandhi's transformation into a leader of national stature. Kheda Movement 1918. Following his success in Champaran, Gandhi turned his attention to Kheda, a region in Gujarat that was also suffering under British policies. The Kheda farmers faced heavy taxes despite a poor harvest, and their protests had been ignored by the colonial government. Gandhi launched a non-violent campaign of non-cooperation, urging the farmers not to pay the unjust taxes. The Kheda movement gained national attention, and Gandhi's leadership in the campaign earned him the respect of many in the Indian freedom movement. The movement was also notable for Gandhi's ability to unite people across caste and religious lines. He showed that the struggle for independence was not just a political one, but a moral and spiritual one as well. The British government was once again forced to relent, and the farmers of Kheda received relief from their taxes. The success of both the Champaran and Kheda movements made Gandhi a national figure, and it was during these early campaigns that he refined his approach to political activism, which was rooted in non-violence, ahimsa, and truth satya. Gandhi's growing influence would lead him to take on a more prominent leadership role in the Indian National Congress Inc., the main political party in the fight for independence. The Non-Cooperation Movement 1920 to 1922. By 1920, Gandhi had become the most prominent leader of the Indian independence movement, and he sought to expand his influence beyond local and regional campaigns. He called for a national movement of non-cooperation against British rule, which became known as the Non-Cooperation Movement. Gandhi's vision was to unite all Indians, regardless of religion or caste, in a mass movement of non-violent resistance. His call for non-cooperation with the British involved several key elements. 1. Boycott of British goods and institutions. Gandhi encouraged Indians to boycott British-made goods, including clothes, textiles, and salt. He advocated for the use of khadi, or hand-woven cloth, to replace British textiles. This was not only a political statement against British economic dominance, but also a call for self-reliance, Swadeshi, in Indian manufacturing. 2. Boycott of British educational institutions. Gandhi believed that the British educational system in India was designed to subjugate the Indian mind and produce a class of Indians who were loyal to the British. He urged Indians to withdraw their children from British schools and establish alternative, indigenous schools that would teach Indian culture and values. 3. Non-cooperation with British authorities. Gandhi called for Indians to resign from government posts, refuse to serve in the military, and withdraw from British-supported institutions. He believed that by refusing to cooperate with the colonial administration, the British government would be deprived of its legitimacy and control over India. 4. Promotion of Hindu-Muslim unity. Gandhi understood that the success of the independence movement would require the unity of all religious and ethnic groups in India. He worked tirelessly to foster Hindu-Muslim unity despite the tensions and divisions between the two communities at the time. The non-cooperation movement was a massive success in terms of public participation, as millions of Indians took part in boycotting British goods, resigning from government positions, and participating in protests and strikes. The movement represented the first large-scale national effort against British colonialism and demonstrated the power of mass mobilization based on non-violent principles. However, in 1922, the movement came to an abrupt halt after the Chari Chaura incident, in which a mob of protesters clashed with police, leading to the deaths of several policemen. Gandhi, disheartened by the violence, called off the movement, fearing that it was deviating from its non-violent principles. Although the movement was short-lived, it had a profound impact on the Indian independence struggle and solidified Gandhi's position as the preeminent leader of the independence movement. Gandhi's philosophy of non-violence and self-reliance. Throughout this period, Gandhi refined his core philosophy of non-violence, ahimsa, and self-reliance, swaychi. Non-violence, according to Gandhi, was not simply the absence of physical violence, but also the rejection of hatred, anger, and injustice. It was a positive force that required strength and courage, and it involved loving one's enemies and seeking reconciliation rather than revenge. Self-reliance was another crucial element of Gandhi's philosophy. He believed that India needed to become economically self-sufficient and free from dependence on British goods. This idea of swaychi was closely linked to his belief in the revival of rural industries and the promotion of local crafts, particularly the spinning of khadi. Gandhi's approach to independence was also deeply rooted in his spiritual beliefs. He saw the struggle for freedom as a moral and spiritual endeavor, where the means of resistance, non-violence, truth, and self-discipline were just as important as the end goal of political independence. Conclusion. By the early 1920s, Gandhi had firmly established himself as the leader of the Indian independence movement. His leadership of the Champaran and Kheda movements, along with his call for the non-cooperation movement, marked the beginning of a mass movement that would eventually lead to India's independence in 1947. Gandhi's commitment to non-violence, self-reliance, and social justice shaped the Indian independence struggle and created a model for resistance movements worldwide. His influence and ideas would continue to inspire generations of activists committed to achieving justice and freedom through peaceful means. Gandhi's leadership in the final years, partition, and legacy. As the 1920s and 1930s progressed, Mahatma Gandhi's leadership of the Indian independence movement grew increasingly central. His philosophy of non-violence, self-reliance, and peaceful resistance shaped not only the Indian struggle for freedom but also global movements for civil rights and social justice. However, his path was not without difficulties. The period leading up to India's independence in 1947 was marked by significant challenges, including political divisions, communal tensions, and the eventual partition of India. Gandhi's leadership and philosophy were tested in ways that would leave a lasting impact on India and the world. The Salt March 1930, and civil disobedience. One of the most iconic and successful acts of civil disobedience in Gandhi's career came in 1930 with the launch of the Salt March, also known as the Dandi March. The British colonial government had a monopoly on salt production and imposed heavy taxes on it, making it an essential symbol of British oppression. For Gandhi, the salt tax was emblematic of the broader exploitation of the Indian people by the British authorities. In response to this injustice, Gandhi initiated a 240-mile march from his ashram in Sabarmati to the coastal village of Dandi, where he would make salt from seawater, defying the British law. This act of defiance was intended to be a peaceful, symbolic gesture that would unite Indians across the country against British colonial rule. Gandhi's call for mass participation in the Salt March was successful in mobilizing millions of Indians, and the act of making salt became an act of rebellion against British tyranny. The Salt March ignited widespread civil disobedience across India, with thousands of Indians following Gandhi's example by making salt or engaging in other forms of non-violent resistance. The British authorities responded by arresting thousands of protesters, including Gandhi himself. Despite the government's repression, the Salt March marked a turning point in India's struggle for independence, drawing global attention to the injustice of British rule in India. the Round Table conferences, and growing tensions. In the years following the Salt March, Gandhi's influence continued to grow, and he became a key figure in negotiations between Indian leaders and the British government. In 1930, Gandhi participated in the Second Round Table Conference in London to discuss constitutional reforms and India's future. However, the talks ultimately proved to be unfruitful, as the British remained unwilling to grant full self-rule to India. During this period, Gandhi also sought to address issues related to social and religious unity. One of his primary concerns was the treatment of the Dalits, often referred to as untouchables, who faced severe discrimination and exclusion from mainstream Hindu society. Gandhi called the Dalits Harijans, or children of God, and worked to uplift their social and economic status, advocating for their inclusion in temples, schools, and society at large. His efforts to address untouchability, however, met with resistance from conservative elements within Hindu society. By the late 1930s, the political landscape in India had become more complex. The Indian National Congress Inc. had shifted toward a more radical stance, pushing for full independence, while the Muslim League, led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, began to advocate for the creation of a separate Muslim state, Pakistan. This division between the Inc. and the Muslim League led to increasing tensions between Hindus and Muslims, as well as growing demands for partition. World War II and the Quit India Movement 1942. In 1942, the outbreak of World War II created a new set of challenges for the Indian independence movement. The British government, embroiled in the war, sought Indian support for the Allied cause, but Gandhi and the Inc. refused to offer support unless India was granted immediate independence. The refusal to cooperate with the British during the war led Gandhi to call for a nationwide movement to demand India's immediate independence. This movement came to be known as the Quit India Movement. In August 1942, Gandhi launched the Quit India Movement, urging Indians to do or die in their fight for independence. The movement called for the immediate withdrawal of British forces from India, and the establishment of full self-rule. The British responded by arresting Gandhi and other leaders of the Inc. Despite the arrests and violent repression, the Quit India Movement galvanized millions of Indians in their struggle for freedom. However, the movement was suppressed by the British authorities, and many of its leaders remained imprisoned throughout the duration of World War II. The partition of India, and the creation of Pakistan. By 1947, the political landscape in India had drastically changed. The demands for a separate Muslim state, led by the Muslim League, had grown stronger, and communal tensions between Hindus and Muslims were reaching a boiling point. The British, exhausted by World War II and facing increasing resistance to their rule, were ready to leave India but struggled to reconcile the conflicting demands of the Inc. and the Muslim League. Gandhi, who had spent years advocating for Hindu-Muslim unity, was deeply troubled by the idea of partition. He believed that dividing India along religious lines would lead to violence and bloodshed. Despite his efforts to bring about reconciliation between the two communities, the political situation became increasingly polarized. In August 1947, India was finally granted independence, but the cost was the creation of two separate nations, India and Pakistan. The partition of India was one of the most traumatic events in the country's history. The division led to widespread violence, with millions of people being displaced from their homes as they migrated across the newly drawn borders. Hindus and Sikhs fled to India, while Muslims migrated to Pakistan. The violence during this period was brutal, and an estimated 1 to 2 million people lost their lives in the communal riots that erupted across the subcontinent. Gandhi was devastated by the violence and the partition, and he sought to promote peace and reconciliation during these difficult times. He spent his final months in Calcutta trying to quell the violence between Hindus and Muslims. He went on hunger strikes to appeal for calm, and was committed to non-violence even in the face of such deep divisions. Gandhi's efforts to prevent the violence were largely in vain, and the impact of the partition haunted him until the end of his life. Gandhi's assassination 1948. On January 30, 1948, as Gandhi was walking to attend a prayer meeting in New Delhi, he was assassinated by Nelson Mandela, a Hindu nationalist who opposed Gandhi's efforts to promote Hindu-Muslim unity. Gandhi's death was a tragic moment for India, as he had dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of non-violence, truth, and social justice. His assassination shocked the world and marked the end of an era in Indian politics. Gandhi's death was not just a personal loss to his followers but also to the global community that had looked to him as a symbol of peaceful resistance and moral leadership. Despite the pain of his assassination, Gandhi's ideas lived on. His principles of non-violence and civil disobedience have influenced countless movements for social change and continue to resonate with activists around the world. Legacy. Mahatma Gandhi's legacy is vast and enduring. He remains one of the most revered figures in Indian history and one of the most influential political leaders of the 20th century. His philosophy of non-violence, ahimsa, and truth satya provided the moral foundation for the Indian independence movement and have continued to inspire movements for civil rights and social justice across the globe. Gandhi's ideas were not just limited to political freedom. He envisioned a society that was just, equitable, and free from social discrimination. His efforts to address the issues of untouchability, poverty, and the empowerment of women remain vital to contemporary Indian society. Globally, his philosophy of non-violence has been adopted by movements such as the Civil Rights Movement in the United States, led by Martin Luther King Jr., and the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, led by Nelson Mandela. Gandhi's message of peaceful resistance, even in the face of oppression, continues to inspire generations of activists. Conclusion. The final years of Gandhi's life were filled with personal and political challenges. The partition of India and the creation of Pakistan were traumatic for Gandhi, and the violence that accompanied it deeply troubled him. Yet, despite these challenges, Gandhi's commitment to non-violence, truth, and social justice remained unwavering. His leadership played a pivotal role in India's struggle for independence, and his philosophy of peaceful resistance continues to have a profound impact on the world. Gandhi's life and legacy stand as a testament to the power of non-violence in the pursuit of justice and freedom. His moral authority, his unwavering commitment to truth and justice, and his belief in the capacity of individuals to create social change continue to resonate across time and place. Gandhi's contributions to humanity's understanding of justice, peace, and human dignity will endure for generations to come.